9 uniformed police officers stand at the door of an apartment on the outskirts of Tokyo. Inside is 28-year-old Tatsuya Ichihashi and the body of 22-year-old Lindsay Ann Hawker, a British English teacher who, the day before, had agreed to give him a private lesson. In a moment, he will throw the door open and run past all 9 officers, barefoot, with a backpack containing his ID, and he will vanish for 2 years, 7 months, and 15 days. In that time, he will move through dozens of hiding places, alter the features of his own face on his own, and make them almost unrecognizable. This is the story of how a manhunt that produced hundreds of thousands of posters ended exactly where no one had been looking. Lindsay Ann Hawker was born on the 30th of December, 1984, into the family of Bill and Julia Hawker. They lived in Coventry, but the family's roots went back to a small village called Brandon in Warwickshire. This was the kind of England where life flows steadily: evening tea, church on Sundays, a garden fence repainted every couple of years. Lindsay grew up in that world, and her childhood held no loud stories. She studied at King Henry VIII School in Coventry, disciplined, stubborn, with an excellent memory for dates and names. At Leeds University, she chose biology. The program was demanding, but Lindsay handled it. In 2006, she earned a bachelor's degree with first-class honors. That is the highest possible result on the British scale, and a master's program lay open in front of her. She intended to take it, but first she wanted a breath of fresh air, a year in another country, a chance to look at the world from a different vantage point. She chose Japan. In October 2006, Lindsay flew into Tokyo and signed a contract with Nova, the country's largest English conversationalist school chain. She was assigned to the Koiwa branch, in the eastern part of the city. The school provided housing, a shared dormitory in Funabashi in Chiba Prefecture, with 2 flatmates, both foreign, both teachers like her. The routine was simple: lessons during the day, evenings at home, weekends spent traveling around the country. Lindsay called her parents once a week. She told them about her students, about the small gestures of politeness that surprised her. She was saving up for a short trip to Korea. She wrote that she felt safe here. People did not flag down taxis alone in the middle of the night here. People were not afraid to walk home on foot. That image of Japan held for several months. It broke at a station in Funabashi when a man approached her with a sentence about an English lesson. That man's path did not begin at the station. It began much earlier, on the 5th of January, 1979, in Gifu Prefecture. Tatsuya Ichihashi was born into a well-off family, the kind Japan tends to call respectable by default. His mother was a practicing dentist, his father a doctor. The family owned a house, a car, a reputation. Tatsuya was expected to quietly continue that line. As a child, he stood out for nothing. A good school, average grades, an art club. Neighbors would later say they could not remember his face, as if he had passed by inside his own life. After school, Tatsuya enrolled at Chiba University in the horticulture faculty. It was an unusual choice, but the family did not object. A diploma was the main thing. In 2005, he graduated and received his degree. After that came emptiness. He did not look for work. He did not apply for a master's program. He did not look for internships. His parents continued to send him about 100,000 yen a month, which covered food, utilities, and the occasional small entertainment. With that money, he rented a 1-room apartment in Ichikawa, in the area around Gyōtoku Station, in Chiba Prefecture, east of Tokyo. Neighbors would later describe him with one word: polite. He nodded in doorways, gave way on the stairs, made no noise. In that apartment, he lived alone. No friends, no girlfriends, no visible hobbies. He had a knack for drawing pencil portraits with neat lines and clean shading. No prior contact with the police. No signals from doctors. No complaints from the family. On paper, Tatsuya Ichihashi was an ordinary young Japanese man of 28 who simply had not yet found himself. And it was that very ordinariness that would become the first trap for the foreign woman who was about to meet him. That meeting took place around the 20th of March, 2007, 5 days before everything ended. Lindsay was heading home after her shift at Nova, riding a train toward Funabashi. The car was half empty, and she was reading. A man sat down nearby, neatly dressed, and addressed her in English with a slight accent. He told her he recognized her, said she had been his teacher somewhere before. Lindsay did not remember it, and that was no accident. He was lying to start a conversation. She got off at her station and walked over to her bicycle. He got off behind her. She climbed on and rode off. He climbed onto his own bicycle and rode after her. She passed several blocks, glanced over her shoulder, and saw him still following. As she neared her house, she stopped. He caught up, stopped beside her, and asked for nothing more than a glass of water. Just a glass of water. Lindsay did exactly what every safety guide for foreign women abroad teaches. She did not silently lead him inside. She opened the door and called out loudly to her flatmates, the two foreign teachers who lived with her. She introduced him. She made it visible. Here is a man. I am seeing him for the first time. He is on our doorstep. If anything happens to me, you have seen his face. Tatsuya Ichihashi behaved impeccably. He nodded to the women, thanked them for the water. He took out a sheet of paper and in a few minutes drew Lindsay's portrait. Neat lines, clean shading. He signed the drawing, left his address and phone number. Before leaving, he asked her for a private English lesson. They agreed. Saturday, a café near Gyōtoku Station in the afternoon. Lindsay had done everything right. She had shown him to witnesses. She had taken his details. She had picked a public place. And it was precisely that which did not save her. It did not save her because on Saturday, the 25th of March, 2007, Lindsay arrived at that very café near Gyōtoku Station. She ordered a drink, opened her textbook, and waited for her student. He showed up exactly on time. They sat at a table for a little over an hour, going over grammar and everyday phrases. The lesson moved calmly. There were enough other customers in the café. It was a public place. Everything was under control. When the time came to settle the bill, Tatsuya Ichihashi said he had less money on him than he had thought. He was short by about 3,500 yen. He suggested they stop by his place. It was nearby, 2 stations away. He had cash there. They would be quick. Lindsay hesitated, but she agreed, and she made one more correct decision. Out on the street, she hailed a taxi instead of walking so that the route would be on record. They got into the car. By Japanese habit, the driver remembered foreign passengers. They were a rare sight in that area. Lindsay asked the driver to wait outside the building. She got out, walked to the entrance, and went up the stairs with Tatsuya. The door of his apartment closed behind her. The driver waited. The meter ticked along. He looked at the entrance, then at his watch. 2 minutes passed, then 5, then 7. No one came out. He did not know the woman's name, did not know which apartment she had gone up to, and was not formally required to wait any longer. After 7 minutes, the driver flicked his turn signal and drove off. At that moment, in the dormitory in Funabashi, Lindsay's flatmates were not yet worried. They knew about the lesson, but did not know the address of the apartment she had gone to afterwards. She had not left a note. That was the last time Lindsay Hawker was seen alive, outside one locked door. And behind that door, the night passed. What happened behind that door was reconstructed later from physical evidence, forensic analysis, and Tatsuya Ichihashi's own statements at trial. The reconstruction is short and grim, and for that reason it is given here without graphic detail, only the facts. As soon as the door closed, Lindsay was deprived of the ability to leave. Investigators would later record marks of restraint on her wrists and ankles, as well as signs of an attack. There were minor abrasions on her body from contact with furniture. The key episode was a prolonged action that led to Lindsay's death. Experts would calculate from the nature of the injuries that it lasted several minutes. That is enough time for any person holding another's life in their hands to realize what they are doing and stop. Tatsuya Ichihashi did not stop. In the trial materials, there is a phrase he used himself in 2011. By his own admission, he had acted in such a way that the neighbors would not hear what was happening in the room. The prosecution called this intent. The defense would later try to rewrite that minute as an accident. The court records preserved the first formulation. Once it was over, Tatsuya stayed in the apartment. He did not call the police, did not call an ambulance, did not run. He began methodically to remove the traces. He laid a bathtub out on the balcony, rolled in a builder's bag, went out for a shovel. By morning, the balcony would look like a construction site. And in Funabashi, Lindsay's flatmates woke up and realized their friend had not come back. They called Nova. Nova called her parents in England. The parents called the police. The Chiba police received a call from England and a call from Nova almost at the same moment. The name of the missing woman, Lindsay Ann Hawker, a British citizen, last seen at a café near Gyōtoku Station in Ichikawa. Her flatmates had a drawing, a portrait of Lindsay signed by Tatsuya Ichihashi with his apartment address on the back. The police set out. 9 officers gathered at the building in Gyōtoku. They were not a tactical team. They were patrol officers and detectives in uniform. Their task was standard: find the woman, check on the man, ask questions. They lined up at the door on the landing and knocked. From inside came footsteps. The door opened a crack, only a few centimeters. In that instant, Tatsuya Ichihashi saw the blue uniform an arm's length away. And in a fraction of a second, he made his decision. He yanked the door wide open, leapt out of the apartment, and lunged forward. He had a backpack on his shoulders. On his feet, nothing. He was barefoot. One of the officers managed to grab the backpack. Tatsuya twisted out of the straps and left the backpack in the policeman's hands. He sprinted to the end of the corridor, vaulted the railing of the stairwell, and dropped to the floor below. The sound of bare feet on concrete. Other officers were waiting downstairs, but the ground team had no radios. No one could shout to them in time that the runaway was already on top of them. Tatsuya ran past them, burst out into the courtyard, and disappeared. 90 minutes later, in a neighboring district, witnesses would notice a man who had found a pair of sneakers somewhere and was still running, zigzagging through courtyards. That was the last anything would be known of him for the next 2.5 years. The 9 police officers stayed at the door. One of them held a backpack with Tatsuya Ichihashi's identification papers inside. And in the apartment they were only now entering, a balcony was waiting. Tatsuya Ichihashi's balcony looked strange. It was a narrow concrete slab, on top of which sat an ordinary household bathtub, tipped over and laid flat. The tub was filled with a mixture of soil and sand, the kind sold in gardening shops. The earth was damp. On top of it, a level layer like a freshly turned flower bed. One of the officers leaned closer and saw something that should not be in a flower bed, something that would prompt an immediate call to the forensic team. The police called in the experts. The contents of the tub were taken apart layer by layer. Beneath the mixture, the body of Lindsay Hawker was found. Forensic specialists recorded what would later enter the trial materials: signs of an attack and prolonged action that led to her death. Many details the investigation would never be able to explain with certainty. By the evening of the 26th of March, the news was on the air. Japanese television channels broke into their programming. The British Foreign Office contacted Lindsay's parents in Coventry. Bill and Julia Hawker learned of their daughter's death from strangers on the phone. Within 24 hours, they were on a flight to Tokyo. The case made the newspapers across all of Japan. A foreign woman, a teacher, a private lesson, a balcony, a bathtub full of sand. Japan had had other high-profile cases involving foreign women, but this one became special. There were too many impossible details, too unusual a method of hiding the evidence, and too obvious a suspect, whose name was already on the documents in the backpack at the police station. In Chiba, a special task force was set up. Tatsuya Ichihashi's face was printed on tens of thousands of posters. They were hung in subway stations, in shops, in police boxes across the country. A reward was announced, 1 million yen, and the manhunt that followed lasted longer than anyone expected. Longer than anyone expected because Tatsuya Ichihashi chose the least obvious tactic. He did not leave the country. He stayed inside Japan, the very country where his face was looking out from the wall of every station. In the first weeks after his escape, he moved from Chiba to Tokyo, then to Kanagawa, and then further west. By the end of 2007, he had reached Osaka, a big city, millions of people, working-class neighborhoods, cheap hostels. He took a job on a construction site under a false name. Construction contractors in Japan have varying practices for checking documents. In his case, the check turned out to be only a formality. He worked as a laborer, hauling cement, dismantling scaffolding, loading sacks. On site, they called him by a fake surname. He did not drink with his coworkers after shifts. He did not go to the bathhouse. He wore a cap and a medical mask. 14 months passed that way. The foreman would later say, "The guy was strange, but he worked steadily." Then Tatsuya changed jobs. He took a position with a ferry company in the same city. Uniform, cap, routine. He worked at the docks, helping with loading. Among co-workers, again, no contact outside of work. The police, meanwhile, were not idle. In early 2008, tips came in about a man matching the description in the Kabukicho district of Tokyo, the well-known nightlife quarter. A few witnesses said they had seen someone who looked like him. The police carried out several sweeps, checked dozens of people, but Tatsuya was not among them. In early 2009, rumors surfaced that he had fled to the Philippines. Those rumors were never confirmed either. In Japan, his face was known to everyone, and no one saw him. He had learned to disappear in plain sight, with a cap, a mask, a downcast gaze, a steady schedule. And the whole time he looked into the mirror and understood that until his face changed, sooner or later he would be recognized. That understanding turned into a decision. In June 2009, the Chiba police raised the bounty on Tatsuya Ichihashi's head from 1 million to 10 million yen, roughly $100,000. At the same time, life-size cardboard cutouts of him were distributed across the country, his approximate silhouette, variants with makeup, versions with different hair and stubble. The search moved to a new level. Tatsuya saw those cutouts at stations every day, and he made a decision that would later astonish Japanese investigators. He began altering his own appearance, without doctors, without help, by himself. This would later become known from his own book, written in 2011. By improvised means, he tried to remove the markers by which he was being hunted, the very features that appeared on the wanted notices. The details of what he did, he would later describe himself. They are left out here. It went on for months. He lived in cheap motels, hid from strangers, waited for things to heal. Then he began the next stage. At the same time, he grew his hair out and lost about 20 kilograms. For anyone who remembered him from television, his silhouette became unrecognizable. In mid-October 2009, he tried to undergo an actual procedure at a clinic in Fukuoka. The procedure was not completed. On the 24th of October that same year, he made his way to Nagoya and walked into a cosmetic clinic with forged documents. He was given rhinoplasty. The bridge of his nose was reshaped. It would be the last operation in his life as a free man. A little over 2 weeks later, in the port of Osaka, the police would walk up to him. On the 10th of November 2009, an ordinary boarding was underway at the port of Osaka for a ferry that would leave for Okinawa in a few hours. There was a queue at the check-in desk. Among the passengers was a middle-aged man with long hair, in a cap and a medical mask. He held a ticket and waited his turn. At that same terminal, an employee of the ferry company was starting his shift. He had worked there for several years. Less than a year earlier, in their own company, but in a different department, there had been a strange new hire, quiet, withdrawn, always in a mask. The very same Tatsuya Ichihashi the whole country had been hunting. The employee had remembered him by the shape of his nose and chin. He looked at the man in the queue and froze. The face had changed. It was narrower, sharper. The nose had a different shape. The lips were thinner. But the posture, the set of the shoulders, the angle of the head were the same. The employee walked into a back room and called the police. 20 minutes later, a patrol arrived at the terminal. They walked up to the man in the queue and asked for his documents. The documents were forged. The officers asked a second question, then a third. After a few minutes, he gave his real name, for the first time in 2 years and almost 8 months. Tatsuya Ichihashi. He was taken to the police station in handcuffs. By the end of that same day, the news was the lead story in all of Japan. The face he had remade with his own hands had not saved him. The reward of 10 million yen was, after the investigation, divided into several portions. One portion went to the ferry company employee who had identified him. One portion went to the foreman from the construction site in Osaka, who had also passed on important information. One portion went to the clinic in Nagoya, whose doctors had reported a suspicious patient after seeing the news. Tatsuya sat in a cell and waited for his trial. Lindsay's family in England packed their suitcases. They packed their suitcases because the trial was set for the summer of 2011. The case went to the Chiba District Court. The presiding judge was Masaya Hota. The hearings were held in the lay judge format, a relatively new practice in Japan. On the 5th of July, 2011, Tatsuya Ichihashi took the stand. He said he admitted his guilt. He admitted that he had taken Lindsay's life. The prosecution classified his actions toward her as an attack on her sexual integrity, a legal term that would appear throughout the case files. The defense pushed for an accidental death. The lawyers tried to build a version that everything had happened spontaneously, without intent, that the action had been brief. The prosecution countered that version with medical evidence. According to that evidence, the action had lasted several minutes. That is not seconds of panic. That is a prolonged, conscious act. That is intent. The Hawker family took a position the entire courtroom understood. Bill Hawker called for the death penalty. He spoke briefly. Their daughter should not have died. The man who did this should answer with the highest punishment. The family's lawyer submitted a written statement to the court. On the 21st of July, 2011, Judge Masaya Hota delivered the verdict. Tatsuya Ichihashi was found guilty of murder, of attack, and of concealment of a body. The sentence was life imprisonment, not the death penalty. The court explained the decision this way. The defendant had no prior convictions, he was 32 years old, and rehabilitation was theoretically possible. Bill and Julia Hawker came out to the cameras after the verdict. They held themselves steadily and spoke briefly. There was justice, but they had not received what they had wanted. Their daughter would not come back, and he had been left alive. That asymmetry would become part of the story. Part of the story because that same summer, Tatsuya Ichihashi published a book. It was called Until I Was Arrested. In it, he described in detail his years on the run, his work on the construction site, his experience with self-performed surgery. The book instantly became a bestseller. The Japanese print run sold out in a matter of weeks. The Hawker family stated publicly that they would not take a single yen of the royalties. But later, a Japanese court ruled that the proceeds from the book be directed to them as part of civil compensation. Bill and Julia accepted the money, but turned it over to a foundation they had set up, dedicated to protecting foreign students and teachers abroad. In 2013, a feature film based on this story was released, called I Am Ichihashi, Journal of a Murderer. Alongside that, another thread came back to life. Nova, the school where Lindsay had worked, declared bankruptcy in 2007, just a few months after her death. There was no direct link between the bankruptcy and the Hawker case. The company had its own financial problems, but in the public mind, the two stories fused. It was not only Lindsay herself who had fallen. The system she had walked into had fallen as well. Japan reviewed its practices for hiring foreign teachers. Stricter rules were introduced for vetting employers. Separate support programs appeared for foreigners in crisis situations. Emergency phone lines were set up in several languages. Bill and Julia Hawker have remained the voice of this issue in the United Kingdom ever since. They speak to the parents of students who are about to work abroad, telling them what steps to take, what questions to ask the school, what rules to set from the very beginning. Their campaign is not loud, but it is steady, and specialist organizations cite their work. Tatsuya Ichihashi is serving his life sentence at a prison in Nagano. Under Japanese law, he has the right to apply for parole after a certain number of years, but in practice the chances are slim. And the bathtub of sand on the balcony of the apartment in Ichikawa was hauled away long ago. The building still stands. Other people live in it now. They most likely do not know.